The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the Virginia mist when Esther's world shattered into 1,000 pieces. She stood barefoot in the dirt, her arms empty, her heart screaming a silent scream that no one would ever hear. It was 1852, and the Whitmore plantation stretched as far as the eye could see. Cotton fields rolled like white waves under the gray dawn sky. The air smelled of earth, sweat, and something darker, fear that lived in every shadow, every whisper, every stolen moment of rest. Esther was 23 years old. Her hands were rough from picking cotton since she was 6. Her back bore scars from the overseer's whip, but none of that pain compared to what she felt now. Her baby was gone. Ruth. Her sweet, beautiful Ruth. Only 6 months old, with eyes that sparkled like morning dew and a laugh that could melt even the hardest heart. Ruth, who had been sleeping in Esther's arms just hours ago. Now the baby was being carried away in a wagon, wrapped in a clean white blanket, heading toward a life Esther would never see. Mrs. Whitmore, the plantation owner's wife, had made the decision. Esther remembered every word, every cold syllable that fell from the woman's thin lips. The child was too light-skinned to work the fields. They could get good money for her up north. A respectable family wanted a house servant. She would have a better life than Esther could ever give her. Those words echoed in Esther's mind like a death sentence. Esther had fallen to her knees. She had begged with every fiber of her being, pleading that they not take her baby, promising she would work harder, that she would do anything. But Mrs. Whitmore had simply turned away, her silk dress rustling like dead leaves. The overseer, Mr. Hutchins, had grabbed Esther's arm and dragged her back toward the slave quarters. He told her she would get over it, that her people always did, but Esther knew she would never get over it. She would carry this wound until the day she died. Now she stood in the yard watching the wagon disappear down the long dirt road. Other enslaved women surrounded her, their faces etched with a pain they all understood. They had lost children too. They had lost mothers, fathers. Loss was the language they all spoke fluently. Old Martha placed a weathered hand on Esther's shoulder, urging her to eat something, to keep her strength. But Esther couldn't eat. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think about anything except Ruth's tiny face, her soft skin, her perfect little fingers. As the wagon vanished into the morning mist, Esther made a vow. She whispered it to the wind, to the earth, to whatever God might be listening. She would find Ruth, no matter how long it took, no matter what she had to do. But deep down, in the darkest corner of her heart, Esther knew the truth. In this world, in this time, enslaved mothers didn't find their stolen children. The system was designed to tear families apart, to break spirits, to erase hope. Still, Esther refused to let hope die. She would carry it like a flame in her chest, burning through every dark night, every painful day. She would survive. She would remember. And somehow, someday her story would matter. 3 months passed like 3 years. Every morning Esther woke before dawn and walked to the fields with the others. Her hands moved mechanically, picking cotton, filling sacks, moving down endless rows under the merciless sun. But her mind was always somewhere else, always with Ruth. Where was she now? Was she warm? Was she fed? Did anyone hold her when she cried? Did anyone sing to her the songs Esther used to sing? The questions haunted her like ghosts. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and red, Esther sat outside the slave quarters with old Martha and 2 other women, Dinah and Bess. They were shelling peas, their fingers working quickly despite their exhaustion. Martha spoke softly, telling Esther that the pain of losing a child never truly goes away, but that she would learn to live with it, to carry it. Dinah, a woman in her 40s, who had lost 3 children to sale, squeezed Esther's hand and shared the same wisdom. But Esther didn't want to carry the pain. She wanted to find Ruth. Bess, the youngest of them at 30, leaned forward and mentioned hearing people talk about the Underground Railroad. She said there were ways to get north, ways to find freedom. Martha shot her a sharp look, warning her to be quiet before she got them all killed. But Esther's heart had already started racing. The Underground Railroad, she had heard whispers about it too. A network of people, both black and white, who helped enslaved people escape to the north, to freedom. Could she do it? Could she risk everything to find Ruth? That night, Esther lay on her thin straw mattress, staring up at the ceiling. The quarters were dark and quiet, except for the sound of breathing and the occasional cough. She thought about the overseer's whip. She thought about the dogs they used to hunt, runaways. She thought about the terrible punishments she had witnessed. People beaten until they couldn't walk. People sold away as warnings to others. But then she thought about Ruth, and suddenly all the fear didn't matter. She would find a way. She had to. Winter came hard that year. The fields turned brown and brittle. The cold seeped into bones and wouldn't let go. Esther's hands cracked and bled from the work, from the freezing water she used to wash clothes. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain in her heart. One December morning, everything changed. Esther was in the main house, scrubbing floors. Mrs. Whitmore was in the parlor, entertaining a guest, a well-dressed woman from Charleston, who had come to discuss business. Esther tried to make herself invisible, working quietly in the corner, but her ears picked up every word. Mrs. Whitmore was explaining that they had sold the mulatto baby to a family in Philadelphia. They wanted a girl they could train as a lady's maid, light enough to pass for respectable. Philadelphia. The word hit Esther like a thunderbolt. Ruth was in Philadelphia. Her heart raced. Her hands shook as she scrubbed. She forced herself to stay calm, to keep working, to show no reaction. But inside, everything had shifted. Now she had a destination. Now she had hope. That night, Esther sought out Bess again. She needed to know about the railroad, needed to know how to get north. Bess looked frightened, but also determined. She explained that there was a man, a free black man who came through. Sometimes, he worked with the Quakers. They helped people escape. Esther asked when he would come again. Bess didn't know. Could be weeks. Could be months. Esther said she would wait as long as it took. But waiting was torture. Every day felt like a year. Every night, Esther dreamed of Ruth, dreamed of holding her again, dreamed of freedom. And then one cold January night, everything changed again. Mr. Hutchins, the overseer, came to the quarters. He was drunk, stumbling, looking for women. It wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last. He grabbed Esther's arm, insisting she come with him, saying she had been looking sad too long and it was time to cheer up. Esther pulled away, begging him to let her be, but he didn't listen. He never listened. What happened next happened fast. Hutchins lunged at her. Esther, filled with months of rage and grief, fought back. She grabbed a piece of firewood and struck him across the face. He fell backward, blood streaming from his nose. The quarters went silent. Everyone stared. Esther stood there, the wood still in her hand, her chest heaving. She knew what this meant. She knew what would happen to her now. Old Martha hissed at her to run now and run fast. And so Esther ran. She ran into the night, into the cold, into the unknown. She ran with nothing but the clothes on her back and the name of a city burning in her mind. Philadelphia. She would find Ruth, or she would die trying. The first night was the hardest. Esther ran through the woods, her bare feet bleeding on frozen ground. Every sound made her jump. The crack of a branch, the hoot of an owl, the distant barking of dogs. The dogs. They would come looking for her. They always came. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. Then she collapsed under a fallen tree, gasping for air, her body shaking with cold and fear. She thought this was madness, that they would find her, that they would kill her. But then she thought of Ruth's face, and she forced herself to stand. For 3 days, Esther traveled by night and hid by day. She ate whatever she could find: berries, roots, snow. She followed the North Star, the way old Martha had once told her. Keep that star on your left shoulder at night, and you'll be heading north. On the 4th night, half dead from cold and hunger, Esther stumbled onto a farmhouse. Smoke rose from the chimney. Light glowed in the windows. She hesitated. This could be help. or this could be her death. She knocked on the door. A white woman answered. Neutered, middle-aged, plain-looking, wearing a simple dress and bonnet. Her eyes widened when she saw Esther's condition. Esther whispered a plea for help. The woman looked around quickly, then pulled Esther inside. She asked if Esther was a friend of a friend. Esther didn't understand at first, but explained she was looking for her baby in Philadelphia. The woman's expression softened. She introduced herself as Sarah and explained that Esther was on the railroad now, that she was safe. Tears streamed down Esther's face. For the first time since Ruth was taken, she felt a flicker of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope? Sarah and her husband Thomas were Quakers, people who believed slavery was a sin against God. They had been helping freedom seekers for years, hiding them in their barn, feeding them, guiding them to the next safe house. Esther stayed with them for 2 weeks, regaining her strength. Sarah gave her warm clothes, real shoes, and food that made her weep with gratitude. Sarah told her she was very brave, but warned that Philadelphia was still far and the journey would be dangerous. Esther said she didn't care, that she would walk through hell if she had to. Sarah smiled sadly and told her that a mother's love is the strongest force on earth. When it was time to leave, Thomas arranged for Esther to travel hidden in a wagon carrying farm goods. Another conductor on the railroad would take her to the next station. The journey took months. Esther moved from house to house, barn to barn, always hidden, always afraid. She met other freedom seekers, men, women, even children, all fleeing the same nightmare. Some didn't make it. Esther heard stories of people caught, dragged back in chains, punished brutally as examples to others. But Esther kept going. Ruth's face was her compass. Ruth's memory was her strength. Finally, on a warm spring morning in 1853, Esther crossed into Pennsylvania. She was free. She stood on free soil for the first time in her life and fell to her knees, sobbing. The weight of chains she had carried her whole life suddenly lifted, if only for a moment. But her work wasn't done. She still had to find Ruth. Philadelphia was overwhelming. The city was massive, bustling with people, horses, carriages, noise. Esther had never seen so many buildings, so many faces, so much movement. She found work as a laundress, living in a small black community in the city. The people there helped her, gave her advice, shared what little they had. But finding Ruth was nearly impossible. There were hundreds of white families in Philadelphia. How could she possibly find one little girl among thousands of people? Esther went to churches, asked questions, searched records. She described Ruth over and over: light skin, bright eyes, 6 months old when she was taken. Months turned into years. Esther never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. But the trail had gone cold. One day, in 1855, she met an older black woman named Clara who worked as a midwife in a wealthy white neighborhood. Clara remembered a family, the Harringtons. They had bought a light-skinned baby a few years back, saying they wanted to train her as a servant. The girl would be about 3 now. Esther's heart raced. She asked where they lived. Clara gave her an address on the other side of the city. Esther went there immediately. She stood outside the elegant townhouse, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. Was Ruth inside? Was she so close? She knocked on the door. A maid answered. Esther explained she was looking for a child, a girl about 3 years old with light skin, brought from Virginia. The maid's expression hardened. She said they had no such child, and that Esther needed to leave before she called the authorities. The door slammed in Esther's face. Esther stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks. Was the maid lying? Was Ruth truly not there? Or had the family hidden her? She would never know. Years passed. Esther continued to search, but the leads grew fewer and fewer. She married a free black man named Samuel, a blacksmith, who understood her pain. They had 2 children together, but Esther never forgot Ruth. Every night she prayed. Every morning she woke with Ruth's name on her lips. In 1865, the Civil War ended. Slavery was abolished. Esther, now in her 30s, felt a bittersweet relief. The chains were broken, but Ruth was still lost. She continued to search for the rest of her life. She checked records, asked questions, followed rumors, but she never found her daughter. On her deathbed in 1887, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Esther whispered one final prayer. She hoped Ruth had lived a good life, that she had been loved, that she knew somehow that Esther had never stopped looking for her. And with those words, Esther closed her eyes for the last time. Her story, like so many others, ended without resolution. But the love she carried, that fierce, unbreakable mother's love, lived on in her descendants. They would remember. They would tell her story. And one day, perhaps, the truth would be found. Maya Johnson sat in her small Chicago apartment, staring at the email on her laptop screen. Her hands trembled as she read the words again. DNA match found. You share genetic markers with descendants of the Whitmore Plantation, Virginia. She had sent her DNA to an Ancestry website 6 months ago, mostly out of curiosity. Her grandmother had always told stories about their family's past, about ancestors who had been enslaved, about a great-great-grandmother named Esther who had escaped to Philadelphia. But Maya had never imagined she'd find something like this. She clicked through the database. Following the genetic trail, names appeared. Dates, locations. And then she saw it. Ruth Harrington. Born approximately 1852, Virginia. Last known residence, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Ruth, the baby Esther had lost. The daughter she had searched for her entire life. Could this be real? Could she have actually found the missing piece of her family's story? Maya printed out every document, every record she could find. She called her mother, her aunt, anyone who might have information. She told her mother she thought she had found Ruth. But there was more to the story. And what Maya was about to discover would change everything she thought she knew about her family, about history, and about the wounds that never truly heal. Maya couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, her mind racing, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. The next morning, she called in sick to work. She couldn't focus on anything except this mystery. She started with public records, birth certificates, census data, property records. She searched through Philadelphia archives, both online and in person. Ruth Harrington had lived until 1920. She had married a man named William Bennett, a carpenter. They had 5 children. Maya's heart raced. 5 children. That meant Ruth had lived. She had survived. She had built a life. But what kind of life? Had she ever known about Esther? Had she ever known she was the stolen child of an enslaved woman? Maya dug deeper. She found newspaper articles, church records, even a few photographs. And then she found something that made her blood run cold. An article from 1895 in a Philadelphia newspaper bore the headline, "Local Woman Claims Stolen Heritage." The article described a woman named Ruth Bennett, formerly Ruth Harrington, who had recently discovered that she had been taken from her birth mother as an infant during the slavery era. The Harrington family had hidden her true origins, raising her as a servant, never telling her the truth. Ruth had spent years searching for information about her birth mother, but she had found nothing. No name, no records, no trail. She had died in 1920, never knowing Esther's name, never knowing how desperately her mother had searched for her. Maya sat in the library, tears streaming down her face. They had both searched. Mother and daughter, separated by cruelty, had both spent their lives looking for each other, and they had never found each other. The injustice of it, the tragedy, the sheer waste, it was almost too much to bear. But Maya made a decision right then and there. She would tell their story. She would make sure Esther and Ruth were remembered. She would connect the pieces they could never connect. This was her purpose now. This was her calling. Maya's research didn't just uncover family history, it revealed something much bigger. A pattern of systematic erasure. She discovered that thousands of children had been stolen from enslaved mothers, their identities erased, their histories rewritten. They were given new names, new families, new lives, and the mothers who searched for them were told to forget, to move on, to accept their loss. This wasn't just history. This was ongoing trauma, passed down through generations. Maya started a blog, sharing Esther and Ruth's story. She wrote about the DNA test, about the records she'd found, about the bitter reality that mother and daughter had searched but never found each other. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other people reached out, sharing their own stories. Descendants of enslaved people who were trying to piece together fractured family trees. People who had been told for generations that their history didn't matter, that the past was dead and buried. But Maya knew the past wasn't dead. It was alive in every DNA strand, every family story, every unanswered question. She also faced pushback. Some people accused her of stirring up old wounds. Others said she was being divisive, that she should focus on the present instead of the past. One particularly harsh comment read that slavery had ended 160 years ago, and questioned why she was still crying about it. Maya wanted to scream. Instead, she took a deep breath and wrote a response. She explained that her great-great-great-grandmother had died never knowing what happened to her child, that Ruth had died never knowing her mother's name, that the pain didn't end with them but was passed down to their children and their children's children. This wasn't ancient history. This was her family. This was her story. Maya's activism didn't stop with her blog. She started speaking at community centers, at universities, at historical societies. She talked about Esther and Ruth, but she also talked about the ongoing impact of slavery, the wealth gap, the health disparities, the mass incarceration. One evening, she was invited to speak at a predominantly white university in downtown Chicago. The auditorium was packed. Maya stood at the podium, her voice steady but her heart racing. She began by explaining that her family's story wasn't unique. There were millions of stories just like it. Millions of families torn apart. Millions of mothers who died grieving. Millions of children who never knew where they came from. She paused, looking out at the audience. She emphasized that the effects of that trauma were still present today. When people told Black people to get over slavery, they were telling them to get over the fact that their families were systematically destroyed, to get over generational poverty, over stolen wealth, over centuries of being told they didn't matter. Some people in the audience nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. During the question and answer session, a white student raised his hand. He suggested that at some point, people needed to move forward, noting that nobody alive today had owned slaves. Maya took a deep breath. She acknowledged he was right that nobody alive today had owned slaves. But she pointed out that everyone was still living in the world slavery built. The wealth of this nation was built on stolen labor. The systems that oppressed Black people today were designed during slavery and had simply evolved. So no, they couldn't just move forward without addressing the past. The student looked away, clearly uncomfortable. After the talk, several Black students came up to Maya, tears in their eyes. One young woman thanked her for telling their stories, for not letting them be erased. Maya hugged her and promised they wouldn't be erased. Not anymore. Maya continued her research, and one day she made a stunning discovery. She found a letter, hidden in the archives of the Philadelphia Historical Society. Buried in a box of miscellaneous documents was a letter written by Ruth Bennett in 1895. Maya's hands shook as she unfolded the fragile paper. The letter was addressed to whom it may concern. Ruth had written that her name was Ruth Bennett, formerly Ruth Harrington. She had been born into slavery in Virginia in 1852. She had been taken from her mother as an infant and sold to a family in Philadelphia. She had spent her entire life wondering who her mother was. What was her name? Did she love her? Did she look for her? Ruth knew she would likely never know the answers to these questions, but she wanted to leave this record, so that perhaps someday someone would find it. Someone would know that she existed, that she mattered, that she never forgot where she came from, even though she never knew where that was. If anyone ever found this letter, Ruth wanted them to know. She had searched. She had never stopped searching. Maya couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She sat in the quiet archive room and wept. Ruth had searched, just like Esther had searched. They had both spent their entire lives looking for each other, and they had never found each other. But Maya had found them both. And now, finally, their story would be told. When Esther's story merged with Maya's research, it transformed from merely an individual tragedy into a document that revealed the wound of an entire society. After reading Ruth's letter, Maya made a decision. She knew she couldn't bring Esther and Ruth together, but she could unite their memories. In Philadelphia, she organized a memorial service at a historic church. Dozens of people from the Black community came. They listened to the stories of Esther and Ruth. They cried, they embraced. Maya gave a speech at the ceremony. She explained that Esther and Ruth had never met, but this story didn't end there, because she was here. They were here, and it was their duty to tell their stories, to remember them, to honor their struggles. The audience stood and applauded. But Maya's struggle didn't end there, because healing the wounds of the past wasn't easy. Part of society still didn't understand the importance of these stories. One day, Maya's blog received hundreds of hateful messages. People accused her of living in the past, of creating division. Maya didn't give up. She knew that telling the truth wasn't always easy, but silencing the truth was even worse. On a cold winter night in Chicago, Maya gathered with all the members of her family. Her mother, her aunt, her cousins. They all came together to hear the story of Esther and Ruth. Maya spread the documents on the table. DNA test results, historical records, Ruth's letter, testimonies about Esther's journey to freedom. She told them this was their story. Esther had broken her chains. Ruth had searched for her identity, and now they had the responsibility to keep their memories alive. Her family listened with tears. Some were angry, some were sad, some were proud. Maya's mother touched her daughter's hand and told her she was a very brave woman, just like Esther. Maya smiled and suggested that perhaps courage was something that emerged when there was no other choice. Maya's work didn't remain limited to just a blog post. Over time, her story appeared in national media. She spoke on television programs, appeared in documentaries, received book offers, but most importantly, she inspired others. Dozens, hundreds of people wrote to Maya. They shared their own family stories. They talked about their own journeys searching for lost relatives. And Maya told each of them the same thing. Their story mattered. Their ancestors mattered. Don't forget their struggles. Don't let others forget. One day, Maya received a surprising email from a genealogy expert. The email began by asking if she would be interested to know that they had found another family descended from Ruth Bennett. Maya's heart began to race. Ruth's grandchildren. They were still alive, and they were Maya's distant cousins. A few weeks later, Maya met with them. In Philadelphia, they gathered by Ruth's grave. They hugged each other. They cried. They shared their stories. And in that moment, Maya felt Esther's spirit find peace. Mother and daughter may not have been able to come together in life, but their lineages had finally united, and that in itself was a victory. Years later, Maya was now an elderly woman. Her grandchildren sat around her, asking questions. One asked why she cared so much about Esther and Ruth when she had never known them. Maya smiled and explained that she may not have known them, but they were a part of her. They were in every strand of her DNA, in every thought, in every breath. A grandchild asked whether she thought they were truly free. Esther had reached freedom, but never found her daughter. Ruth had lived but knew nothing about her mother. Was this really freedom? Maya thought carefully. She explained that freedom wasn't just about breaking free from physical chains. Freedom was about remembering, about telling your story, about refusing to be erased. Esther and Ruth may not have achieved complete freedom during their lifetimes, but their struggle made Maya's struggle possible, and that in itself was a form of freedom. Maya looked out the window. The lights of Chicago shone in the darkness of night, and in that moment, she felt as if she could hear Esther's voice telling her to continue, to tell their story, to not let them be forgotten. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She whispered that she wouldn't forget. She would never forget. Chains may break, but memories never die. Esther's search was forever united with the truth, Maya discovered.